Okay, on to council tax. I have spoke about this before at our landlord seminars, but I am going to cover it again today because it is very relevant and I'm sure something that none of you want to be stung with. Does anybody in here pay for their tenants' council tax? You do? Are you in a HMO or you're just a nice landlord? Oh. If there's any tenants in the room, this landlord here pays the council tax, so we'll have him. Really, we don't want to be paying for tenants' council tax as landlords. You're already paying for enough. You have a lot of outgoings that you need to do. So we definitely don't want to make it your responsibility. But unfortunately, councils have other ideas. And unfortunately, the council tax regulations override anything else. They seem to think that they're way up here and no matter what I say or how much I shout at them, if their regulations say X, then X applies. And there was a recent case, I say recent, it's probably been 12, 18 months now, with Leeds City Council via a guy called Mr. Broadley. And he owned several properties, but 5 of which he was taken to court for payment of council tax. Anybody in here heard this story? Oh, 1. That's good. So I'm sorry for you over there, sir. So he owned 5 properties and Leeds City Council pursued him for payment of council tax. Despite the fact that the tenants, there was tenancy agreements, written tenancy agreements in place, they decided they were going to pursue the landlord for the council tax, okay? Now, within the AST, there was a provision stating that the tenancies became monthly periodic tenancies after the end of the fixed term. Now, again, I think you all know in here that tenancies on a fixed term are that of a fixed term, and all the clauses within the tenancy applies during that period. When that tenancy fixed term comes to an end, again, I hope you all know that the tenancy doesn't come to an end, because if it did, we'd be able to evict people a lot quicker. It goes into what's called a statutory rolling contract. So statutory periodic tenancy is the correct terminology. Because the reason it's called statutory periodic tenancy is because statute law that overrides all contract law states that if you haven't terminated that tenancy or the tenant hasn't terminated it, then it just lawfully becomes a rolling contract. So the council sought council tax from Mr. Broadway under the 6-month rule for periods when the tenant had left but they'd not formally ended the contractual period of tenancy. So this was the facts of the argument. The council claimed that a tenancy couldn't be fixed and periodic. They also argued that after the fixed term, a periodic tenancy was a new tenancy following the rule in super strike. Now, this is the key point within this case, okay? The key point is that for those of you that remember Super Strike v. Rodriguez was a huge case that nearly rocked the private rented sector into oblivion, us as well as agents, by where it stated that when a tenant paid a deposit at the start of tenancy, when that tenancy became statutory periodic, the deposit was in fact a new deposit and therefore required re-registration, reissuing of prescribed information and reissuing of the terms of the deposit. And it just threw the industry into oblivion because it was like, we've got loads of tenancies that have gone into statutory rolling periodic and we've not done all of that because it's not a new tenancy, it's the same tenancy that's just continuing on a rolling basis. Now, thankfully, there was an overruling in relation to this, and you'll be pleased to know you don't have to do that. When the tenancy goes rolling, then now is no requirement to renew the deposit and re-register the deposit and serve the prescribed information and serve the terms. But one thing that they didn't take out or they didn't overrule in this case was the fact that when a tenancy goes periodic, in fact, it is a new tenancy. So, in the eyes of the council tax, what they're saying is, it's a new tenancy. And in council tax regulations, a tenant or an occupier can only be responsible for council tax if the tenancy is for 6 months or more. If a tenancy is for a lesser period than 6 months, the landlord is responsible for the council tax. So if there's anybody out there doing 3-month tenancies or shorter tenancies, because don't forget, guys, there's no minimum term on an AST. You can have an AST for a week if you want to. But under the council tax regulations, legally, the landlord would become responsible for the council tax. Now, in most cases, it doesn't happen because tenants accept that when they sign a tenancy agreement that contractually states that they are responsible for the council tax, they accept that. They know if they're living somewhere, they've got to pay council tax. But in this case, the problem was these tenants were on a housing benefit. They were benefit-dependent tenants. And for those that are on benefits, they don't pay council tax. They only pay a very, very small apportionment to the council. And what the council thought was, I know we can make some more money and get full council tax here because we'll pursue the landlord, because under this regulation we can. Now, they did go, they tried to take it as high of the, I think they got to the High Court, but they didn't get to the Court of Appeal. And basically, Leeds Council were told, absolutely no, the landlord is not responsible. And the only reason he was not responsible was because of this provision here that states, instead of it becoming a statutory periodic tenancy, it was actually a monthly continuation of the existing fixed term. So it was a contractual monthly tenancy rather than a statutory monthly tenancy. And that's what saved him. So what I'd say to you guys in here, and what we did as an agent, and what we've done for you is, if we manage your property or find your tenants for you, we've changed all of our agreements and we've put this clause in so that any tenancy that we now enter into will always continue on a monthly contractual basis. And I recommend that you look at doing the same. And one other thing to consider in relation to council tax. Firstly, if you have a HMO, I'm sorry, you have to pay council tax. Anybody got HMOs in here? Just two. Two that want to admit it, because HMOs have gone crazy. I'm surprised there's just two. If you are a HMO landlord, you cannot pass the council tax obligations onto your tenants. I'm sorry. You just can't. The law states you can't. In fact, if you have two individual sharers, the council tax responsibility becomes yours as the landlord. If you have two non-related individuals living in a property on two separate tenancies, you have to pay the council tax. But be very careful, because council taxes are banded on a dwelling. So if it's a 2-bedroom terrace house, it will be banded as a house. Now, for those HMO landlords in here, be careful with en-suites and kitchenettes, because what the councils are doing, and they're doing more frequently, is if you have a kitchenette or an ensuite in any of your rooms that you're renting out, they are now coming in and they are banding each room individually. So we have a property that we deal with down in Essex, and the council have caught on to this, and they've gone in, and the council tax has gone from £2,000 per year. Bear in mind, the tenancy states landlord's responsible. It's now £6,000 per year. And the landlord has to pay that, because what they've now done is individually banded each room as an individual dwelling. If you don't have a bathroom, an ensuite, you do need to have bathrooms, guys, come on and meet, basic standards. But if you have an ensuite or a kitchenette in the room, this is where this becomes applicable. And more councils are picking up on it. And guess what, guys? What are the councils out to do at the moment? They're out there to make more money. And this is an easy way of doing it.